this doesn't mean that I just live and let live and assume that nobody ever does anything wrong. People have done all sorts of harm in the name of religion, and we need to exercise our conscience actively and speak up when that happens. Your right to extend your fist may end before it gets to my nose, but the mere existence of my nose does not mean you're not allowed to speak up when I stick it somewhere it doesn't belong. The exercise of our religious freedom requires some engagement with all these elements. A standing up for our own liberty, a tolerance for the liberty of others, and an active engagement with our conscience. Continually to suss out where the boundaries of that freedom and that tolerance are, and they shift all the time. Remove one of these elements, and we co-opt our freedom. This is not an easy task. It requires some active discipline on our part. Kind of like juggling. All of those elements have to remain up in the air in order for our freedom to mean anything. It takes some practice. Now imagine that I am not a good juggler. A stretch, I know. And now imagine that all of these balls are on fire. I'm so glad I don't have to fake this example today. You gotta pay attention to what you're doing. You have to practice, 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 because if you don't pay attention, one or more of those balls are going to drop and they're on fire, so they're going to do some damage. Possibly even to us. If we engage in a liberty that doesn't acknowledge the freedom of others, if we engage in a tolerance that doesn't engage our heads, our critical faculties, we truncate our freedom. Or worse, we begin to take it for granted. We take the freedom of conscience for granted in this country. We don't know what it really means not to have it. To the point where nowadays it seems that every difference between us is responded to as though it were an attack on our own liberty. We mistake the inability not to speak about politics from the pulpit as an attack on our freedom. We've lost some perspective about what it means to be free. There are some folks in other countries who might like to have a few words with us on that subject. That same Pew study that talks about our own beliefs in this country, about the existence of freedom of religion, also tell us that the number of people living in countries whose own freedom of religion is under attack has grown by leaps and bounds just over the last 5 years. 2.2 billion people have been added to the rosters of those who are at risk of having their liberty taken away. Something in the neighborhood of 2/3 of the world population lives in a country that doesn't share the freedom we have. Yusuf Nadarkhani is one such individual. Nadarkhani is a Christian pastor living in the Islamic Republic of Iran, a country whose constitution nominally makes a nod toward the freedom of religion, and yet Nadarkhani, who leads a series of house churches in Iran, made the mistake of going to his children's school one day a couple of years ago and protesting some of the new rules about religious education in the schools. Decided to protest the addition of mandatory Quran reading in the schools, something he didn't want his children to go through as part of their religious education. And for his troubles, for speaking out, for being something other than a Muslim, Nadarkhani was imprisoned. Yusuf Nadarkhani has been in prison for about 2 years now. He's been convicted of apostasy, of turning his back on Islam. And this month he faces the possibility of being hung for his beliefs, unless the world can put enough pressure on the government of Iran to rescind the sentence. We don't know what it means not to be free. We make a mistake in assuming that our differences are an attack on one another. No one should have to die for the sake of what they believe. No one should be put in that position. And yet here in this country, if we can't maintain the discipline required of us to truly uphold our freedom of conscience, we put ourselves in danger of creating the very same environment that Yusuf Nadarkhani is in. Nadarkhani, excuse me. I don't want to see the discipline of religious freedom, the discipline that bolsters up that liberty, become a lost art in this country. Yet I fear sometimes we come too close to that. Something's got to change. This country is probably one of the most religiously diverse in the world. If there's any place in the world that needs to have a fully engaged, disciplined religious liberty, it's here, because if we don't have it, the whole experiment falls apart, and probably in big, bad, ugly ways. The turnaround has to start somewhere. So why not here? Somebody has to show the world there's a better way to do things. So why not us? Our congregations, after all, are almost a perfect reflection, a microcosm of what the religious landscape of this country looks like. There are no two sets of beliefs in this room exactly alike, and yet here we are, sitting together week after week, somehow making the experiment work. How do we do it? Believe it or not, all this time, learning to juggle. Keeping all of those elements in the air, advocating for your own liberty. Questioning others in love might seem like a daunting task, but here's the good news. When you live in a community like this, you don't juggle alone. If I drop the ball, somebody else is there to pick it up. Maybe toss it back to me. Maybe I'll catch it someday. But we practice. We screw up, we drop the ball, we pick it up again. We continue to practice. We add more balls into the equation. We add more people into the juggling act. Until at last, with practice, the discipline becomes easier and easier until the juggling starts to look a little bit like dancing. And then we take the dancing out into the streets. And we never stop trying to keep hold of all